I felt like I had to write a song, let's try to have capitalism with a conscience, you know what I mean? Unless
Bob Seger had a voice of gold and a list of enemies made of glitter, leather, and empty lyrics. Seger didn't just hate disco, he feared what it symbolized. At a time when rock fought for the working man, disco was showing up in fur coats, mirrored dance floors, and champagne-soaked clubs. To Seger, it represented escapism, while his music wrestled with reality. Night Moves was about lost innocence. Turn the Page was about road-weary loneliness. And disco? It was singing about dancing all night under a glitter ball. That disconnect infuriated him. In a 1980 radio interview, Seger didn't mince words. There's nothing wrong with feeling good, but don't call it soul if it can't hurt a little. Behind the scenes, his crew recalls him refusing to play certain radio festivals if the lineup was too discoed up. He wasn't chasing hits, he was guarding the gates of meaning. For Seger, disco wasn't just a trend, it was the enemy of depth. One of Seger's biggest frustrations with punk wasn't just the sound, it was the speed. He believed the punk movement, in its rush to rage, abandoned the storytelling that made music matter. In a 1982 interview with Cream magazine, Seger famously said, "Anger's easy. Try singing about disappointment. Try making someone feel that." To Seger, music was sacred, a place where each lyric carried emotional weight. Punk, with its two-chord fury, felt like a teenager throwing a tantrum in his garage. Even his longtime bassist Chris Campbell echoed that sentiment, saying Seger would rather write one great song a year than 100 forgettable ones in a month. At live shows, Seger would slow things down just to prove his point, letting the crowd feel every line. He didn't just dislike punk. He rejected its entire approach to what music should be. By the late 70s, Bob Seger stood atop the rock world, a blue-collar hero who wrote about truck stops, heartbreak, and the open road. But something sinister crept into his airwaves. Disco. Flashy, synthetic, soulless. At least in Seger's eyes. To him, disco wasn't just a new genre. It was a betrayal, a polyester-wrapped rebellion against everything rock stood for. Radio programmers recall the day Seger stormed into studios, demanding to know why his thunderous, heartfelt anthems were being replaced by assembly-line dance music. Engineers remember him turning down synths and cranking up real drums, as if he was waging a sonic war. And at concerts, he made no secret of his contempt, preaching from the stage about the death of real music. Disco may have ruled the charts, but Seger ruled the message. Rock was rebellion, not runway. The rift between Seger and the Eagles wasn't personal at first. It was philosophical. Both came up through the same circuit, smoky bars, long drives, tight budgets. But as the Eagles leaned further into polished, studio-heavy production, Seger pulled harder toward live instrumentation and unfiltered performance. The tipping point came in 1976. As Hotel California rocketed up the charts, Seger privately fumed. He reportedly told his drummer Don Brewer, "They're writing songs for mansions. I'm writing for midnight diners." That line, part criticism, part mission statement, became a lens through which Seger saw the entire LA rock scene. Too clean, too calculated. While Seger embraced the heartland, the Eagles seemed to drift toward Hollywood. Years later, when Glenn Frey, a fellow Detroiter and former friend, passed away, Seger gave a heartfelt tribute. But even in mourning, he made sure to say, Glenn was real, even when others lost their way. That others wasn't accidental. On paper, Punk and Seger should have been allies, both outsiders, both anti-establishment. But to Seger, Punk wasn't rebellion. It was recklessness. He saw safety pins and snarls, but not soul. To him, Punk's rawness felt lazy, like a shortcut through the hard work real rock required. Critics praised Punk for its authenticity, but Seger heard chaos, not craft. Behind closed studio doors, he became obsessed with showing the world That melody, musicianship, and meaning could still punch harder than noise. Backstage at festivals, he refused to mingle with punk acts, calling them kids playing pretend. To Seger, you earned your calluses. Punk, he believed, wanted glory without the grind. So he doubled down. Bigger amps, tighter arrangements, and lyrics soaked in heartland pain. Punk may have wanted to tear it all down. Seger, he wanted to build something that lasted. The rivalry with Springsteen was unspoken, but undeniable. Both men sang of struggle, of steel towns, of Rust Belt pride. But where Springsteen crafted cinematic tales, Seger went for the gut. Industry insiders say Seger resented how critics fawned over Bruce's metaphors while overlooking Seger's memoirs. Against the Wind was a true story. Main Street was about a real girl in a real town. He didn't cloak his truths in metaphor. He lived them, and that authenticity he felt was being ignored. On tour, Seger made sure his live shows weren't just concerts. They were catharsis. No theatrical lighting, no scripted banter, just volume, sweat, and songs that sounded like they were written on the back of a diner napkin at 2 a.m. When asked about Bruce in a 1984 Rolling Stone interview, Seger shrugged and said, "He's got a good thing going. But my thing, it's dirtier. It's closer to the floor." That wasn't shade. It was pride. This one cuts deep. Bruce Springsteen and Bob Seger should have been twin flames. Both champions of the working man, both born of steel towns and sweat. But instead, they became quiet rivals. Critics painted Springsteen as the poetic prophet, the Dylan of Jersey. Seger, just a Motor City grinder. That stung. Insiders say Seger studied Springsteen's lyrics obsessively, trying to find the magic critics swooned over. He believed his songs, raw, relatable, and unpretentious, spoke the truth of the American soul. Springsteen to him was theater, a college kid playing blue-collar dress-up. When Born in the USA exploded, Seger wasn't just angry, he was heartbroken. Not because it won, but because it missed the point. And still won. Backstage, their tension was legendary. And on stage, Seger played like a man fighting for his name. This wasn't a feud. It was a fight for the flag of real America. The Eagles were once brothers in sound, harmonies in the California sun. But to Seger, something changed. Success polished the grit out of their guitars. What began as dusty country rock became boardroom ballads, and Bob saw red. As Hotel California soared, Seger's resentment grew. Not because he couldn't compete, but because he refused to sell out. Studio insiders recall him mocking the Eagles' production, calling it music for people who forgot what hard times sound like. Industry veterans say Seger bristled when the Eagles topped charts with what he felt was smooth surrender, rock with no bite. He feared their success was teaching the next generation that style beat substance. Seger wasn't jealous, he was betrayed. In his world, you didn't trade gravel for gold. Seger wasn't blind to the power of visuals, he just didn't believe they should outrank the sound. He once told a Detroit radio host, "If you've got to watch it to like it, it's not a song, it's a commercial." The emergence of MTV in 1981 sent shockwaves through the industry. Suddenly, good-looking bands with big hair and neon suits could outsell veterans who'd spent decades building legacies. Seger found it nauseating. He shot only a handful of music videos under label pressure and even then insisted they feature real footage. Backstage, tour life, fan interactions. No storyboards, no slow-motion wind-blown nonsense. When glam, bands like Poison and Mötley Crüe exploded onto the scene, Seger doubled down on analog recording techniques and refused to wear stage makeup. And guess what? His fans stayed. Because they weren't tuning in for fantasy. They were showing up for truth. In the 80s, image became king. And to Bob Seger, MTV was the devil in eyeliner. Bands like Duran Duran and Culture Club didn't win airplay with power chords. They won it with cheekbones and camera tricks. Seger saw his beloved rock reduced to fashion shows and fog machines, and he hated it. He refused to play the MTV game. No choreographed videos, no glitter, just amps and authenticity. Executives begged him to adapt. He refused. "Music isn't makeup," he said once backstage. "It's blood." He watched the industry pivot to style over sound, and it felt like betrayal. Seger wasn't just resisting the trend. He was mourning the death of substance. While others lip-synced in designer jackets, Bob bled into microphones. And his fans? They followed. Because even in the neon haze of the 80s, grit still mattered. Seger's most intense battles weren't on stage. They were in conference rooms. One infamous meeting in the early 80s saw Seger walk out mid-discussion after a label rep suggested changing the title of his song "Roll Me Away" to something more pop-friendly. According to his longtime producer, Punch Andrews, Seger turned, stared the exec in the eye, and said, "I don't make music for mall food courts." He was a relic in the best sense, someone who believed that once the business side started, shaping the art was already dead. Label insiders called him difficult, but his fans, they called him real. In fact, Seger once delayed an album for almost a year just to fight for the original mix of a single track. He didn't care about the quarterly report. He cared about the kid in the back seat hearing that track for the first time and feeling seen. For Seger, music was never product. It was promise. Forget the bands. Seger's real war was with the suits, the men in boardrooms who turned dreams into data points. According to insiders, Bob's battles with label execs were legendary. Screaming matches over song choices, album art, even tour dates. He saw labels turning artists into products, trimming their edges, softening their message, chasing trends over truth. One former manager recalled Seger slamming a desk and shouting, "I sing for truckers, not for shareholders." He believed the soul of rock was being strangled by spreadsheets, so he fought for every lyric, every note, every ounce of control. And though it cost him chart placements, TV deals, magazine spreads, he never gave in. Seger wasn't just making music. He was defending an idea that rock and roll should always belong to the people, not the profiteers. Bob Seger's story isn't just about music. It's about resistance, about standing your ground when the flood of trends, fame, and commercialism tries to wash you away. His hatred, yes, hatred, of certain bands wasn't born out of arrogance. It was grief. Grief for a changing industry. Grief for what rock was becoming. Grief for the millions of listeners being spoon-fed surface instead of substance. But Seger never gave in. He stayed loud, stayed honest. And because of that, he didn't just survive the decades, he defined them.